Evening, darlings. So I had quite a few requests for another cooking video. I had two people that asked if I could do something without alcohol in it, so I'm going to do a recipe like that. And I had an overwhelming amount of people that asked if I could be wearing just an apron, which, as you can tell, I'm not going to give you the entire satisfaction of, but I am wearing the apron. So there we are. You're at least getting part of it, darlings. So tonight we're going to actually be making what's called Ohaw, which is an Ainu dish. And Ainu people are the native indigenous people of the island of Hokkaido before the Japanese came and sort of pushed them all out. So without getting into the politics of that, we're just going to be cooking this dish, and it's a salmon-based stew with root vegetables. Because of course it's very far north and very cold here, and salmon is one of the most important food elements for the Ainu, other than actually bear, which luckily we're not going to be cooking on this program. So the meal is a very long cooking process, and actually it's a very clean meal because there's not a lot of extra additives. All of the flavoring is going to be coming directly from our salmon and then from our root vegetables. So you can use, traditionally it was just whatever was seasonally available in root vegetables. The selection I have for you tonight, just because of what was at the grocery store, is going to be onion, potato, carrot, Daikon, which is the Chinese radish, and some sweet potatoes. So hopefully that will be that will give a nice flavor. I'm probably going to add a little bit more to the stock because normally it's just salt, and then the fat is going to cook down from the salmon, and that with the natural flavor of the root vegetables is what gives you your broth. But I don't like to add quite so much salt, so I'm going to actually be using what's called instant dashi, and dashi is a fish-based instant soup stock with the fish involved is bonito is the English term, katsuo is the Japanese word for it, and it's katsuo and kombu, which is a type of sea kelp. So I'm just going to use a little bit of that to sort of intensify the flavor, and I'll probably add some spinach or some other greens to it as well. So so it's sort of a dish that you can make with a lot of different things. This is just sort of my personal take on it based off of what we have. And it's often served with rice now, or sort of millet or some other kind of wild grain. So we're going to go ahead and get started now, darlings, by just cutting up our onions. We're just going to have them we don't have to do anything typical like dicing, just sliced is fine. So let's just go ahead and do that. And for most of it, you just want sort of bite-sized chunks. Of course, the smaller you cut your pieces, the quicker it's going to be cooking. So it's really up to you how much time you want to have your vegetables soften. Now keep in mind, of course, it has a very long cooking time. You don't really need to make them really, really small like you would with a lot of other dishes, including the stew that I made on the last episode. So I'm just going to quickly chop this up, and I do apologize, I have been drinking quite a bit because, of course, it's a filming night, and this is film 11 that I've done now, so I'm trying to get through it as quickly as possible here so that we can continue with the drinking. If you have your onions chopped up, you can go ahead and start. You want your pot to be about half to 2/3 full of water, because of course you're not doing anything sort of extra with the broth, so you can just go ahead and just fill it up and start getting your water heated even as you're chopping your vegetables. I find it's just best as far as time management, because of course this is going to take quite a while. So we're just going to go ahead. I like to put it on sort of a medium-high, just because until it's up to the boil, it doesn't really matter. And of course, to sort of shorten that time, of course you want to add salt, and you're going to be adding salt anyhow, so it's not like it's going to take anything away from it. But salt does lower the specific heat of your water, so it does help it to boil a little faster, as does having the lid on it. So just go ahead and just do that, darling. It'll just make everything so much easier. So I'm going to go ahead now. I have my onions all sliced up. You know, they're not sort of really small, but they're not sort of too big either. They're going to soften, it's not really going to matter. The potato, I'm just going to sort of cut into bite-sized chunks, sort of about the size of my my thumbnail here. But you can do just regular slices, that's fine too. I just, you know, I know it's going to take a while, but I just, it's just a personal preference, darling. It's nothing more than that. So, and then for the carrot, it's going to be the same thing. So it's sort of boring to watch, perhaps. So sort of the biggest size for the carrot you can see is about the size from my first knuckle on my thumb up to the tip. And you don't want to get too much larger unless you're going to be making thinner slices, of course, just because it's going to add more time, and the more surface area that's available, the more that flavor is going to go out into the broth. That's one of the reasons why usually you don't want to boil vegetables in water, is because, of course, what happens is all the nutrients get heated up, and a lot of the vitamins and minerals that are so essential, they're actually very heat sensitive, and you'll destroy a lot of that way. But because we're doing a broth here that's going to be flavored with this, the more surface area that's available, the more flavor will go into your broth. So, so you can go ahead and just sort of cut with abandon. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead, the water is sort of at a pre-boil, it's not even at a light boil yet, but I am going to throw in my my onions, and you can put in garlic. I think wild garlic is a better flavor, but of course when you do these sorts of things, the onions and things like that tend to be a very strong flavor, so you're sort of changing the flavor of your broth to more of the sharpness of either onion and or garlic if you do it that way. So I try to use sort of sweet onion, or something like that that has a little bit less of a sharp flavor, because then you sort of have to try to balance out that sort of bitter tang otherwise. So I have a little more room now. I'm going to go ahead and do the daikon, because for the daikon you really want to remove the outer flesh, because it will put a bitter flavor into your broth. And anytime you cook with daikon inside of your meal, it's very good in things like curries or stews and soups, but you do want to remove that bitter outer flavor unless you're trying to add that into the flavor palette of the dish, which I am not at all trying to do. You could use a peeler, but honestly, darlings, it's a lot faster just to cut off the outside, I find, particularly with these larger pieces like this. I do tend to keep daikon a lot. You know, they stay very well in the fridge for months, as long as there's no moisture trapped on the inside. And if it does, just cut off the one end or the other, and then it'll be fine on the inside. So I'm going to go ahead now and sort of chop this up. And it's going to be the same as all the rest of them, just the bite-sized chunks is all that you need to do. And usually you do keep some of the crispness of the radish in there. It does soften quite a bit, but the nice thing about daikon is it just absorbs the flavor of whatever is sort of around it. So you don't have to worry about it getting too strong, and that's part of why it's actually quite good in things like soups and stews. It's used a lot here in Japan, and of course also in Korea for pickling, because of course it is very good at absorbing whatever it's in. And so perhaps maybe I'll do a pickle video, because there's so many wonderful pickles with daikon, and they're very easy to make. You can even use them for fast pickling, so sort of something that's start to finish within an hour. There's a really good one with carrots. I'll do that later, probably. So we're coming up to a light boil now, so I'm going to go ahead and throw in the things that take the longest amount of time, which is going to be the carrots and the potatoes, and then I'm going to move on to doing this sweet potato. which I find the sweet potatoes take a little bit less time than these particular white potatoes that I have here. So I'm just going to throw this all in. And that's part of the reason you want to leave a lot of space in, is because these are very heavy vegetables and they displace a lot of water. So you want to make sure that you're not sort of overflowing your pot. You can just dump out the excess, but as soon as you start putting in your different vegetables, if your water is hot at all, you're already getting a lot of the flavors in there, so you're sort of getting rid of the hard work that you're moving towards. So with the sweet potato, you also want to do bite-sized chunks. So let's go ahead here, and I'll probably do that one more time. So, now, one of the reasons that I'm doing this dish is because although it's the rainy season down on Honshu, and we don't actually have the rainy season up here in Hokkaido, we do sort of get some residual blowover of the rain, and because it never really gets quite as warm here, it's sort of the temperatures are going down, and I feel like a hearty meal is always sort of best in those situations. So, you know, going back to sort of fall flavor, even though technically it's already summer, but it feels like it's still early spring here. Which is kind of nice. The flowers look so gorgeous right now, don't they? And perhaps maybe I'll do a video of that. So many things I can do, you know. So, it's starting to come up to the rolling boil now. I'm going to throw in the sweet potatoes that are already finished. Not that Daikon. Get out of there. It's not time for you. Not yet. And so I want to have the vegetables all in and the water to boil around the same time so that we can add the salmon. The salmon is going to take a little bit of prep work depending on how picky you are about bones, because of course, darling, isn't that always the bitch of it all. So the thing about salmon in this country and some other countries which I've lived is a lot of places are sort of not very picky about having bones in. You know, you can pick out the pin bones sometimes in fillets in certain countries, but otherwise they're none. Whereas here, the entire bone structure is there, which is part of why the salmon is such a good one to work with, because the bones tend to line up right along the spine, so it's very easy to remove. For our purposes, we're probably not going to remove all the bones, because there's some flavoring that goes into that, but also just because it's very, very time consuming, and you know, I want to actually be able to enjoy some part of my evening, you know. So I'm going to actually turn this down to medium-low, and I'm going to go ahead and throw these the Daikon in now. Just quickly. We're starting to get quite full in this pot, so I'm going to go ahead and show you just how full this little bastard is. So you can see we're getting a little bit full up in here, which is part of course, why we want to have the space in there and don't want to put too much water, you know, because of course then it's just going to overflow, and trust me, darling, you don't want that. It's just such a mess to do that. So anyhow, where were we? Oh yes, so we're going to go on to the salmon now. I like to do it last just because otherwise you are sort of mixing. Some people have separate cutting boards for meats and such, but I'm just not that picky. I just use a good disinfectant on ours. You want a lot, because the more you have, the more it's going to flavor. And normally, I'm not really a big fan of fish skin. It's very good fried, but I'm not really a fan of the flavor. So you need that, though, and you need the natural fats. So getting a fatty fish, of course, is much better than sort of one without. So you want to make sure first to using cold water, and that's very important. Sort of give it a nice little wash off. You know, just to get some of the things that sometimes end up in the process on. And you'll notice a lot sort of where the bones are, and if there's sort of hard bits, of the skeleton there. You'll also find those. So you want to get off anything like that. You can remove any residual scales that haven't been removed, or if you need to remove them, this is the time, of course, to do that. And then you sort of want to get off a little bit of the excess water if you can. I'm going to move on here to the cutting board. So you may notice, of course, there are, of course, pin bones coming up here. Luckily, it looks like this other side, there's a line of bones sort of along here that I can feel some of, but that's not too bad, and then it's just this piece. So I can easily remove those. If you have a lot of bones and it's sort of difficult, one of the nice things is a lot of times there's sort of along a membrane here. I'm going to call it that. That's not actually the term, but we're going to use that term because I can't think of the right term right now. So when it cooks, what happens is it will actually pull away from the flesh. So what you can do is if you keep the parts that have the bones sort of in one section of your pot, as soon as it's done cooking, you can just sort of take that out, remove the bones, and throw everything back in. And that's a trick I've used many, many times with this dish. So I'm going to go ahead and actually cut off the parts that here are completely bone-free, at least up to here. So make sure you have a good sharp knife so that you can get through the skin, because this, of course the skin is quite tough. You can have bigger chunks as far as the fish is concerned because it will flake apart on you. I tend to do sort of bite-sized pieces for things that don't have bones, and for the bones I try to make it pieces that are bigger because it's easier to remove, of course, any remaining bones that way. So sort of this size for pieces with no bone, and then, you know, about 2 or 3 times that. It just sort of depends on how filleted or not your things are. And I will start immediately putting in the fish, because the longer you have that skin in there cooking, the longer you're going to be getting those flavors. Now, at this time, I'm also going to go ahead and throw in my dashi. There's many different kinds out there. They all basically taste the same, you know, a little bit more quality here or there. This is sort of a Japanese housewife's best friend. So just throw, this is about a tablespoon. Well, actually it's more like half a tablespoon, but maybe we'll throw a whole tablespoon in, which is quite a, actually don't throw that much in. Now that I think about it, half a tablespoon is probably more than enough. So I'm kind of out of it, darlings. I clearly need more to drink. So yeah, you want to go ahead and it will dissolve in there with everything else. You can definitely smell already sort of the vegetables coming through. And of course, because I added the dashi, that's the strongest flavor in here, at least for now. So, getting back to the salmon, of course, because that's what we're really here for. What I tend to do is find the parts that don't have the pin bones. Now, a better look at the fish here. We, of course, see these very large bones, but if you go right along here, you may not even be able to see it here, but they are little tiny pin bones, and there are sort of implements that look sort of like a tweezer that are fish boners that you can hear it. That you can use to pull all of that out. So what I'm going to do is actually cut on the other side of that. It feels like this part has no bones here, but it is a hard bit there, so we have to kind of cut that bit off. But we'll be cutting right on the other side of these pin bones along here, and then because we've divided it, it'll be a little easier to sort of remove some as we go, and then we'll also be getting rid of this whole bit on the outside here, because then that underneath this is all bone free, and you can see most of them just sort of come out if you just tug on them. It's not too bad, but the pin bones are absolutely a pain to remove, and doing it by hand I don't suggest. I've had to do it before. Don't do it to yourself, darling. So now we're getting back. The water is really boiling now, so I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it down a little bit. So this is getting down to sort of the low, medium-low setting. So we've discovered this nice set of pin bones, lovely, but I don't actually have a deboner, a fish boner here, so I'm just going to sort of cut that off. And you'll notice a lot of them will sort of come off if you cut along there on your knife, which makes it very easy to get rid of. So if you have a problem with bones, you probably want to invest in a fish boner. But it feels like there's maybe one there, and otherwise it's all free from them. Yeah, so maybe one more here. Yeah, but they just pull right out if you cut it at the right spot. So I'm going to go ahead and make our slices. Sorry, I'm being a little bit rough on this fish, I suppose. But this truly is a wonderful dish, and I wish I had the time to tell you more sort of about the history and culture of the people who've eaten this for literally centuries. And it's sort of a terrible plight that's befallen both historically and even today the people. But if you go to Shiraoi, which is where there's a village actually quite close to where I live here, it's run by people who are of Ainu descent, and it's just a wonderful setup there where they've got the village intact, and actually real descendants are there to talk about their culture with you, and so you can ask them questions. They show you around the buildings and tell you the significance of everything. And it's really nice to sort of get the information straight from the source, as opposed to a lot of museums about cultures where they sort of worked with people there, but the people making the decisions are not necessarily the ones whose culture it is, and I think that's very important. So I'm sure someone will tell me that it's cultural appropriation that I'm taking this dish that was of very great importance to a group of people, and I'm making it at home and sort of putting my own spin on it. But for me, this is more about not sort of trying to take something that's theirs and talking about how, oh, look at what I can do. It's more of learning about different cultures through their cuisine, and I think it says a lot sort of about a people, what they like to eat, and I think it's very important to try new things, and I really do enjoy trying and cooking in my own home different dishes. And honestly, the small little cafe that they have at that Ainu village, which is where I had this for the first time, that's probably one of the best meals I've ever had in my life. It was one of the cheapest meals I've ever eaten, and it was one of the best. And so I think a lot of times we sort of don't realize just how special these things can be. And so I know I'm rambling. I've been drinking. I don't care, darlings. I really don't. We're probably going to have to get rid of some of this broth, which I'm absolutely torn up about. It's awful. It's really terrible, darlings. So you can probably already see that we're getting some cooked color on this. You can't see it too far away, but the salmon is already starting to get pretty well cooked, what's in there already. We have this cheekbone here to get rid of and a little bit of a gill. So that's fine. I mean, the salmon is going to cook a long time. It's going to take probably about an hour to sort of really get the flavors into the broth, and traditionally it would just be the fat is what's really going to give you the most flavor. Okay, so we have all of the bones removed now. There actually weren't as many as I had thought, and I've cut out sort of the remaining bits of hard gill bits. And so we're just going to go ahead and put the last of this salmon in, and then what's going to happen is you're going to want to sort of monitor it, because you don't want it to get to a high boil. If you do that, you're going to be destroying a lot of the really good flavors that you're trying to build. So you sort of just want to keep an eye on it, but well, I sort of do a 10 minutes check, so every 10 minutes we'll just go over and give it a little bit of a look, but otherwise I just sort of let it do its own thing. So we're just going to give it a little bit of a stir so that the newer salmon going in is going to get a little further down, and the older stuff can come up, so that we can get as much of a well mixed set of flavors as possible, and I just spilled, of course, because I always do this, darlings. I always put way too much in. As it sort of cooks off, I'll add spinach, but I won't do it until basically until the end, because of course the spinach I really don't want to have all of the nutrients leached out. I really want to sort of preserve the flavor, because spinach doesn't taste like anything if you completely overcook it. So that's just going to sit, and it's going to do its own thing over time, and until then, you know, which is going to be about another 50 to 70 minutes, I'm just going to sort of work on this bowl. So after about 50 to 60 minutes, it starts to look about like this. You can see that it needs a little bit of a stir. It's starting to get what happens when it gets up to too high a boil. Of course, it's hard to see through the steam now, darlings, but you know, you want to give it a stir every once in a while, like I said. But you can see now that all of the salmon has been completely cooked. Even the last thing to go in, which was the sweet potatoes, are now completely soft and cooked. And so as long as the broth has sort of absorbed that flavor, it's been about an hour and 10 minutes here, you're ready to go. So go ahead and serve with rice or whatever other grain you want to, and you're ready. So there we are. Alright, darlings, so we already now have the Ohaw is finished. So you just go ahead and serve it with a side of rice or whatever other grain that you're wanting to add to it, and that's it. You're completely done. So you can go ahead and turn the heat off and just serve yourself up a big bowl. You don't have to have grains if you don't want. Thank you all so much for wanting yet another cooking video. It's always a pleasure to work with you all, and let me know if there's any other meals I can make you in the future, and I hope you've enjoyed this pleasantry of this apron that I'm wearing, and don't expect nude in the future though, darlings. I'm sorry. There's one line that I will not cross, but thank you all again so much as always, and ta-ta.